Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Great. Today we're going to be talking about something I think we all sort of think about a lot, but I don't know that we necessarily always think about it in with much depth.
Yeah.
And that is the psychology of being conventionally attractive.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to be unpacking, I should say, a YouTube video called Why Hot Girls and Rich Men Stay Single from Sadia Psychology.
Oh, interesting.
You've seen this one.
I have not seen this one, though.
Okay, cool. So, I think it'll be a really interesting sort of jumping off point to talk about all this.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a kind of an interesting topic because we all kind of have these assumptions, right?
Yeah.
About people who are really attractive and whether it's,
Well,
they're male or female, like that they have it easier or, all these kinds of things.
Totally, yeah.
But I'm excited to hear what this video has to say about it.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to touch on is this whole idea of the crazy hot girl. You know, there's this whole trope that attractive women sort of are prone to drama or just kind of have all this baggage.
Right.
And I'm curious if that's what you've sort of seen in the world too. But I guess
I think it's definitely a trope that exists.
Yeah.
For a reason. I mean, there's I feel like there's truth to every trope.
Yeah.
In that obviously it's not every single attractive person.
Right.
Is a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I mean what I find interesting is her perspective is that, attractive women kind of get the worst of men's behavior.
Right.
In a lot of ways. Yeah. They get the men who are willing to be really risky or leave their wives or do all this kind of really over the top stuff to try to be with them.
Yeah.
And so I could see how that would shape your view of men.
Totally. Yeah.
If that was a lot of your experience with men
totally
is that they're not trustworthy.
Yeah.
And that they're only after one thing.
Yeah. Totally. I'm thinking of this example she uses of a woman who maybe has literally seen men leave their partners for her.
Right.
That is gonna, really mess with your ability to trust people.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. It's sort of this whole thing is less about personality and more about just what you've been exposed to.
Yeah.
It's almost like a protective mechanism, you become quote unquote crazy.
Right.
To protect yourself.
Right. Yeah. And from getting hurt, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's really interesting to think about kind of what are the downsides of being conventionally attractive.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we don't often hear about those.
Right.
We just sort of assume must be so easy for them.
Yeah.
And all this, but
I think the number one thing is probably just the amount of scrutiny that they're under.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just constantly being looked at, constantly being judged. I think there's a lot of negativity that can come towards people who are really attractive.
Totally.
Assumptions about their intelligence, assumptions about, whether they're genuine or not.
Totally.
All those kinds of things.
Yeah, and she even talks about sometimes women can be extra competitive with really attractive women, which makes sense. But also that's got to be hard to make real friends.
Right.
Yeah,
totally.
When you're just constantly being judged.
Yeah, she even mentions she's heard of models dressing down or trying to act bookish.
Oh, wow.
To try to counter those assumptions.
It's sad, but it makes sense.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting.
It makes you wonder is it even possible to be yourself, when your looks aren't so dominant in terms of how people perceive you.
Yeah, and it leads to this really interesting concept that she talks about.
Yeah.
Which is hotness as a reality distortion field.
Ooh, okay.
You know.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So she's saying that extreme attractiveness can actually like impact the way people interact with you in a way that creates it like a skewed reality.
Okay.
For you. So like, for instance, for men, seeing a very attractive woman might trigger, those short-term mating instincts.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not that like it's, the woman's fault.
Right.
But it's like she's triggering this thing,
Right.
And then other women might see her as a threat.
Right.
And so it's like she has this kind of like force field around her.
Totally.
That that makes it really difficult to have like just normal interactions with people.
Totally, yeah. Right. Like it's almost like you're being reacted to based on this like this thing out of your control.
And then that like reinforces that same behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, totally.
Sort of.
Yeah. So, okay. This is all very interesting. I'm curious to know what she thinks about the men's side of this.
Yeah.
So like, does she talk about men who are considered very like successful or desirable and how that impacts their relationships?
Yeah, so it's interesting. She talks about how it's less about a man's money or like status and more about
self-esteem.
Right.
Okay. So like if a man has low self-esteem, even if he's really successful, he might still, have a lot of unhealthy relationship patterns.
Right. So it's not just about like having those things. It's about like how you perceive yourself in those dynamics.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And she actually cites studies that show that men experience increased cortisol levels. So the stress hormone.
Oh, wow.
Their partner earns more than them.
No way.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
And their testosterone levels go down.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's like, biologically, they're having this like stress response to that situation.
That's so interesting. So it's we've talked a lot about like how women are socialized to be a certain way, but like that's an interesting sort of like evolutionary or like a biological thing.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It's so interesting.
Okay. Yeah. So this is really thought-provoking stuff. I'm wondering like where does she go from here?
Well, one of the things she talks about is jealousy, which, is something that affects everyone in relationships.
Totally, yeah.
At some point.
Yeah.
So we can dive into that after a quick break.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so jealousy. I feel like we've all experienced this at some point in our lives, whether we're the jealous one or we're with someone who's jealous. But what is her take on how to deal with this?
She really frames it as like jealousy stems from deeper insecurities, which it makes sense, right?
Totally. Yeah.
It's not really about like current situation. It's more about like, the patterns and
the baggage that we bring,
the relationship. And, she talks about how like when we're consumed by jealousy, it's because our sense of self-worth is totally dependent on our partner and their feelings for us.
So it's less about like the external threat and more about like the internal fragility.
Yeah, exactly. And, she says like that trying to suppress it doesn't work.
Right.
In fact, it can make it manifest in like unhealthy ways.
Right.
So like, you might start checking up on your partner.
Oh.
Or, overreacting to situations. Or even like sabotaging the relationship out of fear.
Totally. So what's an antidote to that? Like, how do we break free from those tendencies and build relationships that feel secure?
Well, she's all about like, building a strong sense of self outside of the relationship.
Okay.
So that means like spending time on your own passions, your own interests, your own goal. Basically, like remembering that you're a whole person, independent of your relationship. So when you do that, you're less likely to perceive every little thing as a threat, because you're not constantly seeking validation from your partner, and you're not feeling threatened by interactions with other people.
Okay,
because you have your own thing going on.
Yeah, and so it's almost like you develop this like internal security that then makes it easier to like if something does come up, you can talk about it in a healthy way.
Exactly. Yeah, and like with the right partner, like that vulnerability can actually strengthen the connection.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
it's like work through those things together, build trust that way.
Okay, but I'm sure there are some partners who aren't necessarily going to be down for that kind of open communication.
Right.
What does she say about that?
Yeah, well, she sort of suggests that how your partner responds to that kind of vulnerability is a real test of compatibility.
Okay.
So if they dismiss your feelings, make you feel ashamed, or refuse to engage, then that's a red flag.
Yeah, that's not a good sign. Yeah. But on the other hand, if they are receptive to that, and they listen with empathy and offer reassurance and are willing to work through it with you, that's a good sign.
Exactly. That means you've got a good one.
Okay, so it's almost like building that fulfilling life outside the relationship doesn't just help you manage your own jealousy, but it also helps you choose partners who are good for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. It's about knowing your worth and attracting people who value that.
Okay, that's good. So I'm curious about, so we've talked about managing the jealousy, but what about the deeper insecurity? That's driving it in the first place.
Right.
How do we actually get to the root of that?
She acknowledges that. Overcoming those deep-seated insecurities isn't just about, thinking positive thoughts or repeating affirmations.
Right.
Often requires exploring the root of those beliefs, which might be past experiences, childhood trauma, things like that.
All right, so it's we're really digging deep here, figuring out what are those patterns that are driving those negative self-perception.
Exactly.
And then finding ways to I don't know, rewrite those narratives.
Yeah, and she definitely recommends therapy for that.
Yeah, it makes sense.
A safe space to process those experiences.
Yeah.
And develop healthier coping mechanisms.
Right, and to create a more understanding relationship with yourself.
Yes.
To really recognize that they're worthy, regardless of all that.
And that's where true self-worth comes from. It's not from validation or achievements, but from a deep sense of self-acceptance and love.
Yeah.
Embracing your imperfections.
Yeah.
That's part of what makes you unique.
That's so important. I feel so often we look outward for that validation.
Right.
When really it needs to come from within.
Yeah. It's a journey,
totally
not a destination.
Yeah.
It takes time and effort.
Yeah.
But it's so essential.
And I'm curious too. I feel all this applies to more than just romantic relationships.
Oh, totally.
Our friendships, our work, just how we show up in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when we feel good about ourselves, we show up differently.
Yeah. Totally.
We're more confident, we're more resilient, we're more capable of forming genuine connections because we're not carrying the weight of insecurity and self-doubt.
Totally. It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I'm curious. To go back to the challenges that successful men and attractive women face in relationships.
Yeah.
Does she talk about how they can overcome that?
Yeah. So she talks about how for both groups, it's about finding someone who values them for who they are.
Beyond those superficial qualities.
Right.
So it's not about finding someone who's equally successful or equally attractive.
Right.
It's about finding someone who shares your values, understands your experiences, and can really see you for who you are.
Okay, so it's really it's about connecting on a deeper level.
Yes.
That's and recognizing that. Even people who have it all, so to speak, they still have their own insecurities and fears and doubts.
Totally. Everyone does. It's about letting go of external markers of success and attractiveness and connecting on a more human level.
Yes, exactly. And she points out that successful men often struggle to find partners who value them for who they are and not just for their status or their wealth. They're constantly trying to figure out, does this person really into me, or are they just into my lifestyle?
Right.
You know? Right.
And that can really lead to a lack of trust.
Yeah, I can see that. And then for attractive women, you know, it's like
The concept of
objectification and being underestimated.
Right.
Their looks can become a barrier to
to
forming meaningful connections.
Yeah, because people are just focused on their appearance rather than their personality or their intellect.
Yeah, and it's got to be frustrating to like constantly feel like you're having to prove yourself.
Right.
Or like downplay your intelligence to not be intimidating.
Yeah, it's like you can't win. You know, like if you embrace your intelligence, then you're, you know, too intimidating.
Or you're
and if you don't, then you're just, you know, a pretty face.
Right.
It's tough.
It's like hard. There's just all this baggage that comes along with being conventionally attractive.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, both of these groups kind of have to navigate this like really complex social landscape where there are all these like assumptions and stereotypes that are really limiting.
Right. Okay. So what's the takeaway? Like, how do we break free from these narratives and foster more genuine connections?
The key is like looking beyond those superficial qualities, you know, and seeking out partners who value you.
Your authentic self. Okay, so it's really about finding someone who sees you, not just like your accomplishments or your appearance, but like who you are.
Yeah, it's about the person. Yeah, at the core.
Yeah,
you know. Yeah, that's where true intimacy and connection lie. It's like in the shared vulnerability. Yeah, and the mutual respect. Yeah, and the genuine acceptance. Yeah, of each other's
strengths and weaknesses.
That's so good. It's such an important reminder for all of us.
It is.
Really.
It is.
Regardless of relationship status.
Perceived success. Like it's about valuing those deep, meaningful connections.
Yeah. And those can be found in all kinds of relationships, romantic partnerships, friendships, family bonds. Yeah. You know, it's about cultivating relationships that nourish us, support our growth, and allow us to like experience the full spectrum of human connection.
This has been such an enlightening deep dive. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this topic. But
it's given us so much to think about.
Yeah.
And I think one more point that I want to touch on before we wrap up is, you know, we've talked about building self-worth and fulfilling lives outside of our relationships. But what happens when those relationships end? Like, how do we navigate the pain of heartbreak and move forward in a healthy way?
Yeah, that's a great point. And, you know, she really emphasizes the importance of allowing yourself to grieve.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. To feel the pain. To recognize that heartbreak is a natural part of life and resist the urge to suppress those emotions or rush into a new relationship to avoid the discomfort.
Yeah. It's so tempting to do that.
It is. But, you know, she encourages us to be gentle with ourselves,
to
lean on our support systems, and allow time for healing.
Yeah, that's so important. Yeah.
And as we heal, she reminds us to reflect on the lessons learned, to acknowledge our own growth, and use those experiences to inform our future choices.
Okay.
So it's like, even though heartbreak is painful, there's an opportunity there to growth and transformation.
Like it's not the end of the world, you know.
It's not. It's just a chapter in the story, and then her final piece of advice is to,
you know, focus on rebuilding your life, rediscovering your passions, and strengthening those connections with yourself and with others. Okay, so it's like shifting the focus from what we've lost to what we can create.
Yes, exactly. And the possibilities that lie ahead, and the strength and resilience that we possess within.
I love that. It's such a good reminder that, you know, we're more than our heartbreak. Yeah. You know, it's just a part of our journey, and it can teach us so much if we're open to it.
Yeah, and it can help us, you know, create the relationships that we truly desire, you know.
That's good.
Because we've learned from those past experiences, and we're bringing that wisdom to those
new relationships.
Right.
So.
Okay. I think this brings us to a crucial question that she poses.
Yeah.
Which is, how can we move beyond superficial judgments and foster more genuine connections with each other?
That's a really good question. It's like, it makes you think about like, okay, how often are we judging people based on, their appearance or their success or whatever it is, and not really taking the time to like get to know them as a person.
That's like you're so quick to put people in boxes.
Yeah, and I think what she's saying is like, we need to remember that everyone is fighting their own battles, you know? Everyone has their own challenges, and we don't know what those are just by looking at them. And so when we approach each other with that understanding, with empathy, it opens the door deeper, more meaningful connections, because we're not just seeing the surface, we're seeing like the soul, you know?
It's like connecting on a human level.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think true fulfillment lies, not in fleeting attractions or superficial judgments, but in like the richness and depth of genuine human connection.
I love that. I love that. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. And I hope our listeners feel the same. So I guess as we wrap up, the question I would pose to everyone is, how can you apply these insights to your own life? How can you cultivate more self-awareness? How can you challenge your own biases? How can you create more space, have fun, genuine connection in your relationships?
Such good questions.
Yeah, so I'll leave you with that. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
We'll see you next time.